princes of the church, she can't just write letters. And I don't know. And again, I don't have the answer. I don't know what they should do, but it's getting to the point where they have
Oh,
to do something.
I have a very concrete suggestion of what they should do. This is not a
Yeah, go ahead.
question of dubia. There are no doubts any longer.
Doubts.
It's obvious the Vatican apparatus is conducting a frontal assault on the moral law. So instead of dubia, you have to issue condemnations.
Welcome to another edition of Church and State with Chris Ferrara and Brian McCall. Good to see you again, Chris. I think you've been over to the Eternal City or the Seat of the Antichrist. I don't know which it is, but...
Well, yeah, it was for the Life Site Forum, co-sponsored by the Fatima Center. I was happy to be there. It was actually quite a privilege. I'm honored to have been invited.
Well, I'm sure you wowed everyone with your deep commentary, but also your wit, which makes all your difficult messages easier to swallow.
Well, I don't know about that, but I did make one quip worth repeating, I think. He said that the theme of the synod and synodality is, all we are saying is give sin a chance.
Excellent.
And whenever I hear the word synod, I think of nod to sin.
Nod, right. Well, it's more than a nod, as we'll talk about. But first, let's start where this is the week that the kind of off-year elections happened. And, these enemies of the natural and divine law they are as clever as serpents. So they picked a year when hardly anybody was going to vote because there were no major elections going on. They picked Ohio. They poured millions and millions of dollars, 3-1 to the pro-life movement. They poured into a ballot initiative to amend the Ohio Constitution to guarantee a right to abortion up to when an individual baby might be viable, not defined.
In the judgment of who?
In the judgment of who? Exactly, the judgment of the doctor. So they put this on the ballot when hardly anybody's going to vote because there were no real elections going on. And then they add to the ballot also approving drugs. Let's legalize marijuana, get out the druggies, and get them to vote for abortion. Well, George Soros, Open Society, who backed this initiative in Ohio, got their way, and at about 57 to 47%, so a pretty significant margin, those who showed up to vote approved this amendment. Now, I like it, your thought. You've been in the pro-life movement, defending pro-life activists for decades, and we're supposed to be living in the great panacea that we prayed for in the 80s and 90s. Roe v. Wade be gone. This is what we wanted. But this is where we are. What does this say about what's going on in the pro-life movement, do you think?
Well, the elimination of Roe versus Wade has resulted in a backlash by the infuriated forces of evil who are now going to seek retribution for the declaration by the Supreme Court that there is not and never was a constitutional right to abortion. So, in a way, the backlash could be worse than the previous status quo. Now they're adopting bubble zones again, and local laws. We're challenging some of those. And this new measure is another sign of the backlash. They're getting people to come out to the polls to vote for more, better baby killing.
I mean, what do you think? Do you think something happened in the pro-life movement? Do you think people lost their momentum? Like, hey, we won, we got what we wanted, and are not focused on the issue? What do you think?
Well, this was always the problem in the schema of the federal system. If you get rid of the federal right to abortion, it was always the option of the states to legalize abortion up to the moment of birth. And in fact, at the time Roe versus Wade was decided back in 1973, New York had already led the way by legalizing abortion on demand. It was just a matter of time before liberal-dominated states enacted abortion rights, so-called. Anyway, as I've pointed out in other contexts, the Supreme Court never really invents these new rights. It's just recognizing that it's at the cutting edge of a right that's already being recognized by liberal state legislatures. And this gets me back to something we talked about repeatedly, which is the fact that the organic law of this country, the United States Constitution, makes no reference to any standard of divine and natural law. And I pointed out in writings, including a book I wrote on the subject, Liberty, the God That Failed, that a movement of conservative evangelical Protestants in the 1860s said that the godless Constitution, which refuses to recognize the authority of Christ as the law of the land, his revealed will, binding all men and nations, the failure of the Constitution to acknowledge this would mean that America would end up being a Christless, godless blank. And that state legislatures, even before the incorporation doctrine, would feel compelled by the godless United States Constitution to render their own state constitutions so-called religiously neutral, meaning godless. So the potential for legalized abortion was there from the beginning, and we're just seeing this playing out in the states. It's now a matter for the states to decide. I mean, Roe versus Wade being overturned was a major victory because, just as a matter of principle, that decision was an outrage. It was a total invention, and it created a constitutional right out of nothing. And even liberal scholars said, basically, this was an unprincipled decision. So that's great, but meanwhile, any majority of 50% plus one can legalize baby killing in the states. And that's what it is. It's baby killing.
Although this week, this is not New York, this is not California, this is, I mean, Ohio, a state, again, it's mixed, it's not, but it's got a largely elected Republican government that actually passed an abortion restriction that's now overturned by this amendment. But, again, it's not just where you expected. New York was going to do something crazy. It's spreading, and they've introduced these initiatives in Florida, Texas. I mean, they're going after other states. So is the real solution that the Supreme Court dodged what they should have done? And they should have done what Justice Thomas, I think, would do, and is not just overturn Roe v. Wade, but declare that all people have a right to life even before they're born, and they have the constitutional protection of right to life, and no state can support this. I mean, is that really the only answer legally?
Well, I've argued that in Liberty of the God That Failed, and I even have a hypothetical scenario in which the Supreme Court majority announces that under the Fifth Amendment applied to the states via the 14th Amendment, the unborn child has a right to life without which cannot be deprived without due process of law. Well, what would the due process of law be in the case of an abortion? I don't know, but the counter argument to my position is, well, it's just a procedural right, so there could be due process hearings to determine whether a child should be aborted. If that's the worst case scenario, at least someone has the right to defend the life of the child. So what should have been done, what could be done, and this is the whole purpose of life tenure, the Supreme Court should just declare that there is a right to life under the Constitution that applies to the unborn. But unfortunately, Justice Scalia, for all of his great work, and he's obviously a stellar individual in terms of the American scene, was a judicial positivist who said essentially that at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, and more specifically later on, the 14th Amendment, what was contemplated was rights of walking around people, as he put it in the interview with Diane Sawyer, not people in the womb. I don't know how he arrived at that conclusion, but that doesn't seem to me to be a sensible construction of the right to life. Common law always considered children in the womb to be lives in being, and they should be treated as such.
Absolutely. And again, to those who, I've even heard, oh, well, they're not citizens. The United States Supreme Court has even held there are certain constitutional rights that even, aliens, people visiting the country have a right to. The government can't just say, well, I'm going to kill you. You're not a citizen. Tough luck. You have no procedural right. So again, even if you would argue, as they try to do, well, it's not a citizen yet, there are still fundamental protections that belong to all people within the jurisdiction.
Yeah, well, so the Supreme Court basically turned it over to, instead of the federal coliseum where it's thumbs up or thumbs down, turn it over to the coliseums in each state. So in some states it'll be thumbs up. Actually, I think the correct historical reference is thumbs up meant kill, thumbs down meant let them live. So in some states it's going to be thumbs down, kill all the babies, or rather let them live. And in other states it'll be thumbs up, kill all the babies, depending upon 50% plus one. And as you pointed out, in Ohio, they tailored this referendum to attract exactly the right constituencies at exactly the right time to get the result they wanted. I'm amazed that the Ohio Constitution could be amended by a simple referendum like that.
I started looking into that. It's surprising how many states you can do that. There's a lot of states that a simple majority vote. Now, the good news is another simple majority vote can undo this, but their state constitutions are much easier, in many cases, to amend than the federal constitution.
Well, they shouldn't be, because if it's organic law, it should be very difficult to amend it.
Got it. Well, there's a lot of things that shouldn't be in this
But
country.
anyway, this is it. We're seeing the backlash now. Paradoxically enough, the overturning of Roe versus Wade might end up with a result that in many locales, under many jurisdictions, abortion now will be even more freely available than it was before the overturning of Roe.
Absolutely.
Just as a reaction.
And then, of course, the second Catholic president in U.S. history came out with a strongly worded statement condemning this, defending the unborn. Oh, wait, sorry. No, that didn't happen. He, of course, celebrated the Ohio victory and was gleefully happy that they could continue offering to the god Moloch their young children. So,
well, because according to the American way, whatever religion you have has to be left outside of any federal building you happen to occupy as a federal functionary.
Well, that's not really a problem for him. There's not much to leave outside.
No.
Credit. So,
well, he has a new version of the Catholic faith anyway, which is to use the phrase of what was it? Howard Bloom?
Yes.
The Closing of the American Mind. What was Bloom's first name?
It wasn't Harold Bloom? Harold Bloom.
Yeah, Harold Bloom.
Yeah.
He spoke of the American Jesus.
Right.
The American Jesus, which is conformable to whatever desire the majority has. And you can still say that you're a believer. Even Barack Obama claims to be a Christian.
Well, Pope Francis's Vatican is probably on the same page as we turn to our other story, where you can pretty much come as you are, be as you like, line up for your sacraments. The kissing cardinal, who is now the head of the DDF, has been busy. He's been a busy little beaver. Stopped writing books about the art of kissing and started deconstructing Catholic doctrine. Answered a dubia. So he was asked 6 questions.
Oh, no. More dubia?
More dubia. More dubia. Pretty dangerous stuff. So anyway, he's asked 6 questions. And conveniently, right after the synod that wasn't changing anything, he released these questions that were actually answered over the summer, but they were kind of held till everybody went home. Here are the questions. Can a transgender person be baptized? Can a transgender person be a godfather or a godmother at baptism? Can a transgender person be a witness at a wedding? Can 2 homoaffective persons be counted as parents of a child who must be baptized and who was adopted or by other means such as surrogacy? Can a person who is homoaffective and cohabitating be godfather to a baptized person? Can a person who is homoaffective and cohabitating be a witness at a wedding? And essentially the short answer to all of these is, sure, whatever. As long as it's not a problem, but it's never a problem, so yes, go ahead. No problem. Yeah, you want to go ahead. And in fact, it's interesting. The one question was worded homoaffective and cohabitating, right? Thing they used to hide behind is like, how do we know? Maybe they like men, but maybe they're not doing anything. I mean, they make it explicit. They're moved in together. No problem. They can be a godparent. They can be a spiritual model for this person being baptized.
Oh, I see here the standard sleazy tactic employed here to legitimate the latest defection from the faith, which is the standard disclaimer. Oh, this can be done provided there is no occasion of scandal. But per se, it's scandalous to allow this to happen, to allow people who are transgender, who have mutilated themselves, who obviously are psychologically disordered and can certainly be objectively outside of the faith because of their determination to ignore their own gender and try to convert themselves into something else by way of self-mutilation. These people obviously are of dubious Catholicity, and it's not prudent to allow them to proceed as if they were in conformity with the teachings of the faith. And the dubia recognized that there could be an objective reason to doubt whether these people are committed to the faith. But having said that, the answer to the dubia says, even if there is an objective doubt as to whether these people are in conformity with the faith, prudence might dictate that you allow it to proceed anyway, the baptism, the witnessing of weddings, and so forth. So it's double talk. We can't allow it if it's scandalous, even though it's per se scandalous. But even if there's a problem with this, you have to allow it anyway because of pastoral prudence. So it's just basically carte blanche for allowing these people who clearly have no conception of what it means to follow church teaching on the integrity of the human person, to proceed as if they're totally in conformity with the faith and to baptize and treat their children as if they are the siblings of validly married people. And the undermining of Catholic teaching in this permission, it should be obvious to anybody. This is another attack on the family as ordained by God, which is the result of a union between a man and a woman and nothing else.
Well, there's another thing I want to focus on, which I found interesting, right? That they keep referring to these transgender people, right? Now, again, we all sort of fall into the modern language, but when you're writing an official church document, you need linguistic precision. And by adopting this phrase, they're basically adopting the falsehood of the whole ideology that there is such a thing.
There are no
That you can
transgender
be
people.
a man. There is no. There's just basically men who have mutilated their bodies and are dressing up in dresses, and vice versa. But they sort of just accept this premise that there can be a person that was a man that is, quote, now a woman.
The same problem arises with the idea of the homosexual person as a person who is defined by an intrinsic disorder. And the Catechism still calls it an intrinsic disorder. I guess that's the next hill they're going to try to conquer, changing the Catechism to remove references to the homosexual condition as intrinsically disordered and homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity. It's right there in the Catechism. And of course, they're acts of grave depravity. We don't need to descend to details. Anyone can imagine for himself what these people engage in, and especially if they're cohabiting. The idea that homosexuals, and even worse, transsexual homosexuals, because there are such things these days, who cohabit, are unquestionably engaging in acts of grave depravity. The idea that these people could be godparents, or that they could have their children that they've purchased effectively on the adoption market baptized with no questions asked about their fidelity to Catholic teaching. It's an unspeakable outrage. Never in 2,000 years have we seen anything like this, but never have we seen a pontificate like this in 2,000 years. This Pope seems determined to undermine the very foundations of morality, going beyond the liturgy, going beyond eschatology, going beyond the finer points of Catholic theology in general. He wants to attack the foundation of the moral order. Unbelievable, but that's what's happening.
But let's go to that one you referred to, because that's one I think some people their heartstring might get pulled, or they might be deceived. Say, oh, wait a minute, even though they're doing this thing, this is an innocent baby. Shouldn't the innocent baby get baptized? I mean, what has the church always said about, do you have parents who are objectively living outside the church? Should you baptize that baby if you know they're going to be raised in this environment?
It's a disservice to the child, a terrible disservice, because if the parents are not going to raise the child in the faith, what they're doing is they're incorporating into the mystical body someone who will be divorced from the mystical body by the action of the parents themselves, who will refuse to raise the child according to Catholic teaching, who will instead feed him transgender, quote unquote, propaganda and homosexualist propaganda, perverting the will of that child from the very beginning. It would be better for that child not to be baptized and leave that to providence.
Well, you're right. I mean, as many saints have said, you would increase, a sense, the punishment of this child in the next life by increasing their culpability, right? To whom much is given, much is expected. And so the baptized soul is held to a greater standard. So really, the church has always done that. They have to, again, you don't have to second guess and, well, maybe are they the best Catholic or not, but someone who is, again, cohabitating, holding themselves out as in a relationship like this, or shows up to the baptism in a dress and mutilated body parts, it's not a sort of doubt, as I said. And that's what's interesting. This even says, even when you have objective evidence that they're not repenting from this behavior, go ahead. I mean, frankly, if you can do this, what's left? Frankly, what could you say is beyond possibility if this is if all these things are permitted?
Well, I mean, suppose the parents happen to be Satanists, and as a lark, they would like to have the child baptized.
I don't know about that. I tell you what, I think the only thing's left, if they have a big carbon footprint.
Yeah.
To Francis, the only unforgivable sin is to attack the environment. So, I mean, I actually could see him even bending backwards on that one. Well, they're Satanists, but they're good Satanists. Their heart's in the right.
One has to wonder how much longer this Pope will be allowed to occupy the chair of Peter. And in that time, how much more damage he can inflict. It seems to me he's just getting started. And now that this kook Fernandez is the head of what used to be the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, all bets are off. I mean, chaos is going to ensue because this crackpot has no conception of traditional Catholic moral theology. And on the contrary, he seems determined to obliterate it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's sad to say that, we were pretty worried when Cardinal Mueller came in under Benedict because he had some strange theological views. But right now, he seems like he was the only dam holding back
Yeah,
what was going on for many
he's
years.
Pius X compared to who's in charge of the former CDF now. And it seems to me that this whole notion that Francis has introduced of discernment trumps any and all moral precepts and any and all doctrines, because all you have to do is engage in discernment as to whether that doctrine should apply to you, whether that moral precept should bind you. So this idea of discernment is like sulfuric acid on the joints and ligaments of Catholic teaching. You can just discern everything away. This is the latest in a long string of novelties, neologisms that have been coined since the Second Vatican Council: ecumenism, dialogue, interreligious dialogue, the opening to the world. And now we have the latest neologism, discernment, in a twisted sense of discernment, not discernment as to whether you are doing God's will and whether you're living up to the obligations that he imposes on every living human being, but rather whether you should be excused from those obligations. That's not the meaning of discernment. That's a refusal to discern. But then again, double talk. They say the opposite of what they mean. They affirm what they deny and deny what they affirm, and that's the essence of modernism.
And again, another double talk in this that we referred to earlier is, again, another classic phrase of Francis. Well, how can you say no to these people? God's love is unconditional. And they've completely destroyed the meaning of that, God's unconditional love. They've taken it to, I literally, like I said, everything goes. God doesn't care what you do.
No, he doesn't care what you do. So that means ultimately what this is all moving toward is universal salvation. Everybody's saved. Mm-hmm. So what do we need the church for? Well, I guess we need the church to proclaim that everybody's saved. That's it.
Right.
Job done.
Well, and stop your carbon footprint. Don't forget that. We got
there's all those social activities, those vital things like fighting climate change, whatever that means.
Right.
And this is the trend.
Canonizing Greta Thunberg. We got to do that. I mean,
this is the trend of the last 60 years, and this is exactly what Pius XI warned of in Mortalium Animos, when this idea of ecumenism and openness to other religions was first introduced into the church by subversive actors. He said, this is going to result ultimately in the abandonment of the revealed religion. And this is the great project of the Enlightenment, by the way, to dispense with revealed truth and to leave us in a situation where, well, you're pretty much a good guy. You're doing the best you can according to your own lights. And, you can be a virtuous atheist. And so basically everybody's an anonymous Christian and everybody's saved.
Because God loves everybody.
God loves everybody, no matter what you do. And so who are you to be so judgmental? There's no judgment. There's no distinction between inside and outside of the church. There's no distinction anymore between right and wrong conduct. I mean, that's rigid, isn't it? That's right and this is wrong. You can't do that. That's wrong. Oh, that's totally rigid. So now the ecumenism of religion is applied to morality so that we have degrees of morality. Well, you might be living in an abominable relationship with someone, a homo-affective partner, but there are degrees of goodness in that relationship. So we can't condemn him outright because God loves everybody unconditionally. So he's doing the best he can in his concrete circumstances. It's a total dissolution of all categories in Catholic thinking. It's a total dissolution of the common sense that man has about what is right and wrong. Really, this is an element of the crisis that has reached a level never seen in the history of the world. It's really the end of thought as such, rational thought. It's that basic.
It is, and I guess I'd say to the cardinals and bishops, the time for dubia is over. I mean, what we learned from their dubia over the summer is the time for writing letters is over. And again, it's not to us, the laity, not even a simple priest to do something, but you're the hierarchy of the church. Princes of the church, she can't just write letters. And I don't know, and again, I don't have the answer. I don't know what they should do. but it's getting to the point where they have
Oh,
to do something.
I have a very concrete
Right?
suggestion of what they should do. This is not a
Yeah, go ahead.
question of dubia. There are no doubts any longer.
Doubts.
It's obvious the Vatican apparatus is conducting a frontal assault on the moral law. So instead of dubia, you have to issue condemnations. Now, if
Yep.
a half a dozen cardinals got together and held a press conference in Rome, enumerated all of these propositions, and condemned them and demanded that the Pope retract them, that and nothing more might bring an end to this insanity. Because what would Francis do then? But instead, we are in this endless process of, excuse me, Most Holy Father, but we have these questions about these doubtful things that your head of doctrine has just said. Could you please give us a double talking answer that goes on for 16 pages and then,
I mean,
and then
it's
ignore
kind of like
us?
the parent. It's kind of like the parent that walks in the kitchen and the kid's hand is in the cookie jar. And they go, "Oh, I'm not sure what you're doing. Were you cleaning the cookie jar, or you weren't trying to steal a cookie, were you?" I mean, that's kind of what. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean,
I
the
have
time
to say, I'm not judging anyone's subjective disposition,
yeah,
but to be posing dubia at this point when everyone knows what is going on is
yeah,
disingenuous. It really is.
yeah.
Enough of the pretense of royal deference. This Pope seems determined to sully the office and drag it down to the lowest possible level. And the only thing a cardinal, a prince of the church, can do is to say to the king, I condemn what you're doing. You must stop. We're not talking about deposing him, because no one can depose the Roman pontiff. There's no tribunal that can do that. The only thing that could happen conceivably is a subsequent pope could declare
Yes.
that he lost his see, or a council presided over by a pope could make that declaration, because that would be an act of the magisterium. But at the very least, there has to be a condemnation. Enough with the dubia.
Yes, I agree. And look, then, he might. Look, where do you want to stand in history? Okay, he's going to remove you from office. We say, then fine. I'm not. In fact, I'd say, till you stop this, we're not cooperating in your destruction
You
of the
have to
church.
do that.
Right?
I mean,
Yes.
all the theological writers on this subject, while insisting that no one can depose the Pope, say that when a Pope
Right.
behaves in this way, actually in ways that not even they could have imagined, there's a duty to impede the execution of his will, to prevent it from being
Yes.
carried out. Because as the head of a commonwealth, the most important commonwealth in existence, the ecclesial commonwealth, he has no right to abuse his authority. And when he does so, he has to be stopped. That's it. But they're not doing that. They're still posing dubia as if there is some question about what is going on here. There is no question about it.
Okay.
This is subversion,
Absolutely.
and it has to be resisted.
Absolutely. And again, we've been warned. Our ladies' apparitions in the last 2 centuries have told us bad times are coming. Well, more than 2 centuries, going back to Quito, right? That cardinal would be against cardinal. The church was going to be in crisis, and I am your only hope. And she told Juan Diego, a feast will be coming up in a couple of weeks. Am I not your mother? Am I not here? So we don't need to run like Chicken Little from this. That God is in charge. The Blessed Mother will take care of us. We can't get swept up in this, but those who are in the office to act need to act, and we need to pray they do that.
And by the way, on that theme of hope, to which we always return at the end because it's so
Yeah.
necessary, I just read an article the other day that the idea of the young progressive priest is proving to be an illusion, and that the
Yes.
new priests coming out of the seminaries who managed to escape the homosexual network are all tending toward conservatism, cassock
Yes.
wearing priests, many of whom want to learn or have learned, and at least say privately, the traditional Latin liturgy. I just went to confession at the local pro cathedral, and I encountered there an obviously very young priest, and I have to say he's the best confessor, and this is in a Novus Ordo parish, I have ever
Wow.
encountered. His piety
Wow.
was absolutely astonishing. I was so
Wow.
overwhelmed by the advice he gave me that when I left the confessional, I told someone else in the line, that is one great priest. So the Holy Ghost
Wow.
is working, even in the context of the Novus Ordo. And in spite
Yeah.
of what we're seeing from the vertices of the church, we see green grass growing up through the cracks, as it were.
Yes.
And the church is trying to restore itself and will restore itself eventually. Notice, by the way, the failure of Francis's attempt to abolish the Latin Mass. His directives in that regard are just widely being ignored. So the Holy Ghost is in operation at all times. There will eventually be a restoration, but that doesn't absolve us of the duty to stand up and say no to what is being foisted upon the church by Francis and his cronies.
Yes.
And cronies is the word.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it. Hope everyone has a good Thanksgiving coming up, and we'll hopefully get together in a couple of weeks. Maybe we'll have some good news to talk about.
Well, I'm sure we will. There's always some. Until the next time, then.
Until next time.